Hey, praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And he went up into the ship unto them, and the wind ceased. Now they were sore amazed in themselves beyond measure and wondered, for they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened. And when they passed over, they came into the other side, into the land of Gennesaret, and drew near the shore. And when they were come out of the ship, straightway they knew him, and ran throughout the region round about, and brought in beds all that were sick, when they knew where he was. And in whithersoever village, city, or country he entered in, they laid the sick in the streets, and besought him that they may touch, as it were, but the hem of his garment. And as many as touched were made whole. So this is the continuation of my last video, when he first started to walk on water. So we know that they just came back from being sent out two by two, given power over unclean spirits to cast them out and to heal all manner of sickness and diseases. Take no coat, no scrip, no money for the purse. Take not two coats. Be shod with sandals and carry a staff. Whosoever shall not receive you, seek out the very dust of your feet. When they came back, then, they were seeking a private moment. So they went over to the other side by ship, but they followed him on foot. It wasn't really across a body of water, but more so along further down. And it said that he taught them until the day was far spent. Then that's when he fed them with the fishes and the loaves. So then after that, he sent the disciples over to the other side by ship. While he sent them multitude away, he went up into a mountain to pray. When he was done, then, having no one to take him over to the other side, he walked on the water. And when they saw him, they cried out for fear, saying, "It is a spirit." But he said, "It is I, be not afraid." So this is where we pick up from that. So we see him, going into the ship and then being sore amazed. We would think that by now, the things that he does, just expect greatness and, jaw-dropping moments, because they were amazed when he rebuked the wind and the seas the last time that they were in a boat together. They're amazed that he's walking on water. So in this one, it's not shown where Peter is called out on the water when he said, "Lord, if it be thou, bid me to come." I always say that each gospel, it emphasizes a different part of the story. If you're looking for Peter walking on water, check Matthew. It might be all this is from Mark. It might also be in Luke and John. I haven't gotten there yet. So whatsoever one story will emphasize, the other, might leave it out. Like in some, when he was crucified next to the two thieves, in one it says where, they railed on him. In another it said that one railed, but the other said, fear is not thou God, seeing that, we're in the same condemnation, but, we do justly deserve the deeds of our actions. But this man, having done nothing, is innocent. And Jesus said, he said, "Father, let me be with you. Remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Jesus said, "To this day you shall be with me in paradise." Another one says that he was just crucified next to two thieves. So it's really to put the stories together. If you look at one, when he was at the Last Supper with Judas, in one it says, "To him who I shall dip and give sup." In another one it says, "He that shall dip his hand with me in the dish." So, they each emphasize a different part of the story. It's up to us to, read through it and come to the understanding and put all together and understand that wherever one is more, if give is given more details, it's safer to say you could go with that one, because, they're each telling the same story, but they're each given a different viewpoint. They each are given a different assignment, communicate, certain aspects, that happen, so that no one book is more important than the other. 'Cause what one lacks, the other will have. And what it has, it's probably a safe bet to say that the others will lack. So we see them here being amazed. In the last one, when he was asleep and the winds, the water was filling the ship, it said that he arose and rebuked the winds and said unto the sea, "Peace, be still." The wind ceased and there was a great calm. But in this one, it is said, as soon as he entered the ship, the wind ceased. We don't really see him, communicating with nature here, but it's just said that it stopped. Maybe he did say stop, or maybe he didn't, but it's not reported to us. So he gives the place where they go next. It's the land of Gennesaret. So that's where we're headed. That's where we're gonna do our next things. Anybody that's mentioned coming up next is gonna be in Gennesaret. The place where we're coming from. He didn't give a name. When he had sent them out and they were coming back unto him, he told them, stop and rest a while, because you guys have been out preaching and healing and doing all these things. Rest. And it says that it just says, let's go apart, onto the other side to a desert place. The name of the place wasn't given. So we see here a comment being made on the state of their heart, being hardened, so that they didn't consider the fishes on the loaves. This just goes to show us that sometimes we can go through things and we're not aware of the significance of what it means. Self-awareness and reflection. If you want to become, expert in these things, it's self-development. That's why self-development is so important. Reading these books, Think and Grow Rich, any books that list you the keys to success or building, good habits. These things, they really show you things that are around you every day. and it gives you a frame of reference in what they mean and how to move them, how to manipulate them in your favor. You ever seen when psychologists do that test where they show you pictures and they ask you what it means? And it's usually black, like a black image on a white, cardboard. The point of this is to bring what's on the inside, bring it out for them to see, where you at, what kind of mind you have, what things are affecting you and bothering you, how you think, and who you are on a whole, on a deep level. Because if I were to use this to explain to you the mind that has been refined through self-development versus the mind that has not, they'll show you these pictures and you'll say what you'll say. You say, oh, this one looks like a weapon. That one it looks like a dog. This one it looks like a boat. And you'll describe things that are reflective of your inner state and your beliefs when really it's just really objective things. But the self-developed mind, you'll be able to see, all right, I'm seeing this image on my old self. I can see how it would say it looks like this. But now that I'm evolved, to a certain level, I can see that it does look like that, but it also looks like this, and it looks like this also. And depending on who I am, I will say this answer. Self-development, it gives you so many tools. So, where psychology was in the days of the disciples, it was, pretty much non-existent. If somebody had an issue, they were just labeled crazy. They didn't have diagnoses of bipolar, schizophrenia, mania, depression, and all these things. It's just that if you had a problem, that you were mental. So then there's a drawback and there's a positive also, because they had Jesus with them who could give them the answer to all things. They had him in the physical where they could ask him XYZ and he could tell them ABC. Whereas now, we do ask questions and we do get answers, but you might ask a question, you don't get the answer until a couple months later, and it might be something that you have to figure out and put together. He gives you the pieces. Whereas with them, because remember, he always spoke unto them in parables. Afterwards, he would always tell them the meaning, because he said, unto you it is given to know the mystery of the kingdom of heaven. That's why I explain it to you. But unto them, that are without, all these things are done in parables, that seeing they may see, not perceive, hearing they may hear and not understand. Lest they should see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their heart, and turn and be converted, and I should heal them. So they considered not the miracle of the loaves because their heart was hardened. One might jump to the conclusion and say that they were ungrateful, because none of them had brought anything to eat and they just had their fill of food and they didn't even really see it as anything. They didn't consider that they were just about to go and buy 200 penny loaves of bread with no fish. They would have just had bread and it wouldn't have been enough for everyone to get even but just a little mouthful. So, it's really taking things for granted, sometimes. And, Jesus, he was light years above the knowledge that was available at the time. It's like going to cavemen and showing them, electric stoves, propane stoves when they just discovered fire. It's like showing them, central heating, through an icy winter. How do you explain pyrotechnics when they just discovered how to rub flintstones together and then to catch a piece of bush on fire? So Jesus, when he came with what he did, he really left it for us, because the Bible does say that the things which were written aforetime were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. And he even said unto them, the things I do now you understand not, but later you shall understand them, when I am risen, after my crucifixion. And we see here, them recognizing him when he came out the ship and running, through the region round about and bringing all that sick unto him. So Gennesaret, we're in right now. They don't always give the names to all the places that they go. A lot of the time they'll just say, let's go over to the other side. But we've seen Capernaum named so far and Gennesaret. Was this his first time in Gennesaret? Because, if not, then you see how everybody heard about him in the region round about. And it's even said that they recognized him. So if he didn't come there before, then he went somewhere where they were. Because, these people, they do move around. They do have family and friends in different, locations and matters of business also. So they recognize him, saying this is him. Because, in those days, they didn't have internet. They probably didn't have, posters, and, advertisements like that. So we see a really touching of the hem of the border here being centralized. I like to use the word centralized. You can use weaponized, but then that's not such a good word, right? Yeah, and this goes to show that I already said this in one of my videos where, God, he'll take what one person did and he'll make it become a core thing that, everybody else does. Why do we pay tithe? It was all the way back in the days of Abraham. When Abraham had read, Lot, he was kidnapped where he was living with the kings of Sodom. And Abraham, he took his 300 men and went, or was it 400? And he rescued Lot, from 5 kings. It was 5 kings that banded together and they came and spoiled Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities. And Abraham went and he took all their spoils of war and he met Melchizedek, which is King of Kings, Lord of Lords. and he gave him 10% of everything that. So now that's why we pay 10% in church. Offering sacrifice unto God. Who was the first to ever do that? The first person to ever offer a sacrifice unto God lost their lives because of it. Cain and Abel. The Bible says in the process of time that Abel brought an offering unto the Lord, and so did Cain. Now Abel, he was the keeper of sheep, while Cain was a tiller of the ground. He was a farmer. So we have a shepherd versus a farmer. God had respect unto Abel's offering, but unto Cain's offering he had none. Now we know that the Bible describes Jesus as the perfect Lamb of God slain from before the foundation of the world. And we wouldn't see animal sacrifices, unto the Lord until Moses built that tabernacle. So it was Abel unto guys like Enoch, Methuselah, and those guys, Nimrod, the mighty hunter, up until where we see Noah, where God wiped out the whole population of the earth, because he looked upon the heart of men and saw that it was continually evil always and only. So then Noah goes down, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Israel, who was Jacob, his 12 sons, which after Joseph died, then a new Pharaoh came. And then that's when we see the birth of Moses, who was given the tabernacle, which is a copy of what was in heaven. And they offered offerings unto the Lord. Even though they did, but it wasn't an official thing. Some men did. So God, he'll take sometimes what one man does, and he'll require it from everyone. He'll make it an official thing. All right, so let's get into these scriptures. It starts out saying, and Jesus went up into the ship unto them. The storm was calmed, and they were marveled in themselves beyond measure and wondered. So he went up into the ship, and immediately the storm ceased. Bible says that they had been rowing against the wind because it was contrary, and they were toiling. So at this point, Jesus, whatever lesson he wanted to teach them, it was learned here. And now they know that he can walk in water as well as command, the weather. So he went up into the ship, and the storm ceased. And it says that they were astonished in themselves beyond measure and wondered. So we see the word, astonished, being associated with Jesus a lot, throughout the Bible. The very first time we saw it was when he was little, and they left him behind when they went up to be taxed, and they had journeyed like 2 whole days, 3 days, before they realized he was missing. When they came back, they found him in the synagogue, disputing with the doctors and lawyers, and they were astonished at his answers. When he calmed the winds, when he was asleep in the boat, they were astonished. When the guy lying in the bed sick of the palsy, when they let him down through the roof, and Jesus said, "Thy sins be forgiven thee," when he took up his bed and walked, they were astonished. If we're going to speak about the good, why not the bad? When he had not washed his hands before he ate, the scribes and Pharisees, they were astonished at that, right? Bible says that they were, astonished that he had not washed, before eating. Then he goes on to say, "For they considered not the miracle of the loaves, for their heart was hardened." So now we know that God had hardened Pharaoh's heart so that he might, prove his wonders and miracles, so that all the nations round about would know his name because of the things that he would do. So their heart being hardened, was that of them? Was that, of him? Because remember, he just sent them out 2 by 2, and they did all these miracles, and they didn't have him. So, all these things were done without him being present. So, hopefully this was supposed to have, given them a more deeper appreciation of the art that it is that they and him also perform. This was supposed to really open their eyes, because, them going out, by themselves, a lot of questions that they would ask, they got answered themselves, and they saw how the inner working of everything, how it worked. So now they were not just hearers only, but doers also. So, a deeper appreciation of things was supposed to have sprouted up in them. But, instead here we see, their hearts being hardened. I always like to say they got so many things wrong. When he told them, "Beware of the leaven of the scribes and Pharisees," they thought it was because they had forgotten to take bread. But Jesus said, "Are you yet without understanding?" He speaks to them of the hypocrisy of their doctrine. Because in the Bible, leaven is used to represent, hypocrisy. When they tried to cast the devil out of that little boy, he said, "Oh, faithless and perverse generation," unto the disciples. Most of the things that they always got wrong. So them hardening their hearts, you can just put that, with everything else. When the scribes and Pharisees were trying to make a big deal out of him not washing his hands, and he said, "It's not that which goeth into the man which defile the man, but that which cometh out." They even needed that to be explained, and he got really frustrated with them, saying, "Are you yet without understanding? No, you're not that which went into the man, enter into the belly, and is passed out into the draught. But it's the things that come from the man defiles him. Murders, adultery, theft, fornication, lasciviousness." All right, so the next one it says, "And when they were passed over the other side, they came into the land of Gennesaret and approached the shore." So this is just announcing where they're coming over in Gennesaret, and they're docking, get ready to dock. But like I said, they don't always give the name of the towns that they go to. Some of the times, most of the time, they just say, "Let's pass over to the other side. Let's pass over to the other side." So Gennesaret, here we come. And it says, "And when they were come out of the ship, straightway they knew him." The fame of him had gone abroad so much. Anywhere they went, they recognized him. Which leads me to ask the question: was this the first time they had been in this region? And if not, then at least somebody there recognized him from somewhere else. When he was transfigured, when he took Peter, James, and John up in the mountain and he began to pray, and the nature, the form of his countenance was changed. His raiment became, exceeding bright as the light, and even his skin. There's a great misunderstanding that happens when we're giving glances into the spirit. Sometimes God will give you a glance into something. Maybe it'll be just like maybe a second worth of you seeing something. The mistake that we make as humans is that we think that, we saw it once and then it's gone, then it's gone. But no, it's always there. And that's where we mess up in not understanding that these things are, they're going on and they're happening. When they saw him transfigured on that mountain, so understand that this one glimpse of them seeing him transfigured, that know that he was always in that state. He was always in that state. And that's why wherever he went, demons, they could see him from away from so far and fall at his feet saying, "Let us alone, Jesus, son of Nazareth. What have I to do with thee? I know who thou art, the Holy One of God." The guy who he cast legions out, it was said that he was always in this the cemetery and in the tombs and in the mountains and then crying himself, cutting himself and crying. But when he saw Jesus, he came and fell at his feet. Understand that this so what he showed them was a glimpse into the spirit of who he was, and they saw that. And then, moments later, they saw him back as being a regular person. Know that he is always like that. It's just that he allowed them only to see it for that one moment. So when he was coming out of the ship, straightway they knew him. Even if they couldn't see it in the natural, that's what was walking around in the spirit. So they knew him. Because as soon as he came out of the ship, they knew him. And they ran, and the Bible says next that they ran throughout the region round about and brought in beds all those that were sick when they knew where he was. They've heard the stories of him. Some of them have seen him in action. Everyone knows everyone that is sick. I guarantee you, for everyone that had a disease or a sickness or a possession, there was one person that knew, and they came and got them in this moment. In one line of text, we hear them say that, are the gods come down, to be with us in the form of men. They said this about the disciples, but here is, the God, not God's God. Here is the God, single God, coming down, in the likeness of men. So when they get their healing, then obviously they're gonna be curious, and then after the healing, then they hear what he has to say. Then they gotta know that something is up. They gotta know that there's something different about him. He's not a scribe or a Pharisee in the temple, reciting unto you the law of Moses and expounding a little here and there. But this man, there's something different about him. I haven't said it in a while, but then you can ask the question: how could they say, give us Barabbas, away with this man, away with this man, let him be crucified? And I always give the same answer. At the Last Supper, when he dipped and gave sop to Judas, the Bible says the devil entered into him. But what the Bible does not say is that the devil also entered into the whole atmosphere. He is called the prince of the power of the air, and that's why he was able to have such a organized, choreographed command of everyone, having them say the same thing, having them, believe the same thing, feel the same way. So when they saw him, they ran throughout the region round about, brought in beds all that were sick. And then the last one it says, and whithersoever village, country, or city he went in, they laid the sick in the streets and besought him that they may touch as it were the border of his garment. And as many as touched were made whole. All right, so here's something I can point out. When a woman with the issue of blood, which is where this came from, so they saw it happen for her, and now they know it's a thing that can be done. Your testimony is about how God brought you through. In there is bits and pieces of how he helped you. And that's why it's good to testify, because one person might be going through something and they'll hear your testimony and then they'll figure out, so that's how I get the help I need. What you might take for granted, as they did here with the fishes and the loaves, is going to be somebody's key and aha moment where they realize what they need to do to make it through. So remember, there was a lot of people, thronging him, and she made her way and touched by the hem of his garment. Then he looked around and said, "Who touched me?" So then the Bible says she feared, came and told him everything. So she came and told everything. So she told also how she thought, if I but just touch the hem of his garment. So now here we have them touching the hem of his garment because of her testimony. You see, her testimony sprouted a whole new line of believers. The believers of touching the hem of his garment. I gave one bad example of the word amazement. When they were amazed that he didn't wash his hands before eating, the scribes and Pharisees. And I said earlier that God sometimes he'll use one man's what they did and make it a thing for everybody. So here's a bad way that happened in the Bible. What is a bad way of one person doing something and then a whole bunch of people copying it? What's one bad thing in the Bible? His first miracle, the wedding in Cana of Galilee. They ran out of wine, and what happened? His mother came to him and said they have no wine. And maybe that's why he answered her like that, because he knew what would be the offspring of what she was about to do right now. He said, woman, what have I to do with thou? And that's his mother, right? So really right now he had two choices. He could tell her no and just sit back and prevent this whole line of believers that resulted from what, this situation turned out to be. So he could have told her no, or he could have just did it and lived with the consequences. Now we have a whole bunch of people worshiping Mary, saying that she has power over God. So that's one bad example in the Bible where once somebody did something, then now we have a whole bunch of people doing it. So now they're whatever they want, they're coming through Mary. Because even if he didn't feel like doing it because mom said so, anyone that you see praying to Mary, reciting that Hail Mary full of grace prayer, that's actually one bad thing that came from the Bible. It wasn't a bad thing in and of itself, but all right, so you're gonna have people with different minds and different tendencies. So now we have a whole bunch of people, believing that Mary has power over God. And if she has power over God, then she must be God, right? But this is just a negative example of this, concept. The thing that they should have understood is that he did it just because it was his mom. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Not we are the way, the truth, and the life. Any man that come unto me, not any man that come unto us. It didn't say unto us a son and daughter is born. No, it said unto us a son is born. Unto us a child is given. The government shall be upon his shoulders, not upon their shoulders. And even worse, not upon her shoulders, for those who will say that, well, she is completely God. Understand that it's just one of those things. Don't fall victim to it and just move on. That's all you can do. Understand that it's just one of those things that happen. Sometimes something, it just happens. I'm pretty sure, as a stupid example, I'm pretty sure if we were to take a whole bunch of people and rain was falling, and we were to put out in the middle of somewhere and have them, hold their hands out, trying to prevent raindrops from touching the ground, I'm pretty sure that no matter how you tried, one raindrop would find its way to that ground. And it's just one of those things that happens. But like I said, you understand it, don't fall victim to it, move on. And that's all. I am Straw Greenhorn.